Perfect. I can see a bunch of other people have joined who were not there for the first session. So guys, welcome to the Step Up Festival. We're just getting started with our first panel discussion. We're just waiting for another minute so that other people can join as well. And we will then just get started with the discussion. So thanks a lot for joining us. Perfect. So it's 1:20 and it's time for us to get started with our first panel. We have all the panelists here. So thanks a lot, guys, for joining on time, which is organizing a festival on Zoom, which is back to back, which we realized is quite a skill. So it's a good experiment that we are doing, I would say. But thanks a lot for joining us. And thanks a lot to all the attendees who've joined us for the first session. This session is focused on a very important topic. There has been so much talk about it. And that's why we wanted to kickstart our discussion in Step Up Festival with this. We have an amazing panel coming from different walks of life and people from investing background to Lubomila, who runs a startup. And we will get different views over here. And that's why we had created this panel this way. So before we jump into it, and for a lot of people who've just joined us, to give you some background on ourselves. So my name is Mayur. I'm the co-founder of MatterWest, where we're basically trying to empower young working adults to manage the money in a better and a planet-friendly way. So we are connecting dots of putting the different stakeholders in the ecosystem of sustainable finance and helping you, me, and everyone on this call personally to adopt sustainable finance so that we can plan, save, and invest in what matters to us. So if you've just joined us, this is the agenda for today. We'll be going through a few panels as well as workshops. So stay tuned. The session is running live on Facebook Live as well as on Zoom. So if you're on Zoom, the session just keeps going on. So you can just keep dialed in. We take 5-minute breaks between the sessions. On Facebook Live, we do stop the session and start a new one. So you can be asking questions as well as commenting on both these places. And of course, the festival also goes tomorrow with multiple sessions coming in. And this is, of course, not possible with the people we have in this panel and many more coming later today and tomorrow, who have managed for us to kind of put this together and to bring multiple stakeholders in sustainable finance onto one stage. So that's enough of me boring you guys. So this is going to be the agenda for the discussion. We will have a panel discussion for 25 minutes, followed by a Q&A. You can ask your questions in the Q&A tab of Zoom, if you're on Zoom. You can also ask your questions on Facebook Live, if you're watching the session on Facebook Live, and we will actually, our team will get it onto Zoom as well. So you can ask the questions on both the places. So, and also at the end of the session, we're going to do a poll in which we want to actually rate, we want you to rate us on how much financial jargon did we use during this session. Because that's something we want to work towards, because if we can't be a zero waste festival, let's try to reduce the financial jargon. That's the comparable we had. So, so poll for that and tell us how well did we do. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen so that we can get into the discussion. And guys, thanks a lot for joining us. And I think the first question that I wanted to start with, and Christian, it would be great to get your views on it. And of course, just feel free to introduce as you talk about the companies and the background that you have about. So the topic at hand, what is the overall progress, in your opinion, running SDGx, and what is the overall progress in terms of financing the SDGs and the progress, especially in the post-COVID era? Because I remember doing a webinar with you 3 months back, things were a bit different. So what is your opinion on the topic and how we are moving forward?
Okay, so maybe just briefly on SDGx, and thank you, Mayur, actually, for inviting me to the panel. So we do venture capital, impact venture capital, particularly on climate tech, in Australia and Europe and Southeast Asia in particular. if you ask me towards the progress, I think it's relatively positive, I think. I mean, the initial shock with COVID and the impact it has obviously on the economy was pretty strong also for us because you didn't know where you were at actually. So that was quite complicated, but I think we're getting used to it. I think that's probably the unfortunate way of saying it. And so I don't think in the long run this will have a massive impact. In fact, I think it might actually have a positive impact because it shows how vulnerable, for instance, supply chains are and how vulnerable the whole system is that we have built. And so I think from that perspective, this gives us an opportunity to leverage the learnings into making investments that actually improve these infrastructures. And part of that has to be that we invest in climate mitigation, that we invest in more sustainable solutions that are more resilient, essentially. And that's very much aligned with the SDGs. Obviously, there's a lot of money still missing that goes into this. And I'm pretty sure throughout the whole 2 days, you will talk a lot about ESG metrics and so forth, how you can actually invest sustainably. But I think on that end, there still needs to be a lot of things to be done. And that has to do with the amount of money, but it's also to do with the process and how it is invested and what you actually then do with the money, how you measure the impact that you have and so forth. And 3 months ago, I said we are a long way ahead, or we have a long way ahead of us. And I think that's still true.
Thanks a lot, Christian, for those opening words. And because you talk so much about impact, and I'm pleased to welcome Virginie on our panel. Virginie, I would love to talk to you more about the impact investing side and actually how it is actually linked, because a lot of people, when think about sustainable finance, they think that impact investing is something completely different. However, it's kind of a subset. So would love to hear your thoughts and of course about your work in the space.
Thank you, Mayo. So briefly, I'm Virginie, the CEO of a family-owned private foundation with a public status in Belgium. We fight against poverty by investing and doing venture philanthropy. And as you say, sustainable growth is really linked to impact investment. So the way we act in Belgium is that we are investing and giving money. So we try to do with every project we sustain, we support, to do a layer funds. So we will give money, make guarantees, take equity, and if we can innovate in the financial tools, for example, by building a social impact bond. So now we are part of 2 social impact bonds out of 3 in Belgium. And we also invest in the infrastructure. So we are one of the co-founders of the LITA platform. So maybe you know LITA is active in France, in Italy, and we were one of the co-founders in Belgium. So we take equity of LITA and we really support them to grow and to attract more social entrepreneurs, to make the social entrepreneurs more active and have a better financial way of being supportive to the ecosystem. That's basically what we do.
Thanks a lot, Virginie, for that. And I think there's a question which came on the chat, even when we were actually talking about Metaverse and giving the introduction. It'll be interesting to get your opinion on that later in the Q&A section. I will actually move on to Lubomila. Lubomila, thanks a lot for joining us. And what I wanted to talk to you about was looking at it from the company's perspective, right? Because at Plan A, you're doing that, whether it's Plan A or Green Tech Alliance, some of the initiatives that you have initiated are basically kickstarting a lot of this change. But where do you see financing of the SDGs coming in touch with the companies, and how do you see it changing, improving, and where are we today?
Thank you so much for the question, Mayo. For those of you that don't know the activities of Plan A or the Green Tech Alliance, maybe I can add a bit of context. Plan A is a software as a service platform that helps other companies calculate, monitor, and reduce their emissions. We have been working on this topic with a science approach for the last 3 years, and it's really exciting to see that there's a lot of uptake on reducing your carbon footprint from the company perspective. Another initiative that maybe is relevant for some of the listeners is called the Green Tech Alliance. This is an alliance we launched in the beginning of May this year. We've had an incredible response from the community, over 700 applications from companies. 350 have been approved of them. And the purpose of the community is essentially to push forward the green agenda and align these companies so that they build complementary products so that they can solve the problems within one ecosystem, and also to solve their own problems with the help of over 200 advisors that are venture capitalists, journalists from TechCrunch, from other famous outlets, and essentially solve any problem that they face. With regards to the question that you asked, Mayo, Europe is definitely emerging as a powerhouse of eco-friendly, sustainable startups. And this has been validated also by the amounts that have been poured into this ecosystem. As also was mentioned by Christian, it's not enough, but we definitely see a huge increase in Europe. There's been more than 100%. There was yesterday a report that came out from Tech Nation for anyone interested. I'll put it in the chat afterwards. Even though the statistics look positive, I would say that there's still very little knowledge about what does it actually mean to invest with balancing impact and profit. And we notice it by listening or hearing from the Green Tech Alliance members about what are their conversations with mainstream venture capitalists and how do they approach actually analyzing their performance. The investment thesis is still predominantly driven by KPIs related to traditional VC. And this is something we hope is going to change in the next few years, and the level of education is going to be increasing, because it really hurts when you only look from one side, even though you can contribute to society from so many others.
Thanks, Lubomila. Thanks a lot for that. That was very interesting. And you talked about a lot of startups coming up in the green tech ecosystem, and that's exactly the time I want to start talking to Varan, who's actually relaunched Makeimpact, his startup. If I'm not wrong, 4 days back now, Varan, is that right? 5 days back?
Almost.
So,
Yeah.
Varan, take it over from here and tell us more about Makeimpact and how you are actually looking to solve this problem from a retail investor perspective.
Yeah, I would say, like, if we look into how MetaVest is also trying to solve the solution here in impact investing space with knowledge and getting people to actually get started on this impact investing journey. I would say Makeimpact, we're helping people to get started on this journey. We have experienced a lot of knowledge gap in the younger generations. The young generation would really like to make an impact in the world. They would like to eat, meat-free Mondays, would like to bike to work and use a lot of like buying secondhand. But using your money to make an impact is actually still a question that they ask, like, is investing not just gambling? How can I actually change the environment or make a better environment or better tomorrow with my money? There's so much lack of knowledge in that space, and that's what we would like to bridge that gap. So Makeimpact is going to be a platform where we help people being educated and then create a community around it, and then like making an impact with their investments. So that's how we have been. We're working 1.5 years in this with a beta version, and then we are launching really soon. Launching a new launch of our app, but helping out people who have never invested before. And looking into also what you said with the knowledge gap. Even the organization have a lot of knowledge gap in terms of how to contribute to a more sustainable world. But the younger generation also needs some more information about how to actually use their money to change the world with the money. So that's what we are onto and trying to work with in Makeimpact.
Sounds really interesting, Varan, and congrats on the launch. I'll get back to Virginie on the question of the financing gap, because you've been working in the impact space, if we talk about in specific, and the challenges in impact space tend to be multitude. I was recently moderating a webinar with a few impact investors, and the topic of the session was scalability of social enterprises. So when you get to impact investing, the problems are multitude. However, the actual impact and the whole concept of the UN SDGs, which was the fact that no one gets left behind, is truly covered in impact investing. How have you seen the fund flow change, whether it is from the developed world, from developing world in terms of climate finance, or in general for impact investing? Do you see it growing? And do you also see that the organizations on the ground are able to align themselves with the sustainable development goals and actually put this to practice?
Excellent question, and that would need a lot of answer, but I can maybe testify about the maturity of the social entrepreneurs. As you say, a lot is about the scalability, and we are still facing with the, how would you say, the unknowledge, so that the poor knowledge they have about how to use impact investments really as a tool to the scalability. So there is a lot of education still needed with the funders, because they want to have more money to get the impact scale up, but they're not ready to do it. So we feel there is a lot of conflict between the smart money and the funders. And so we are still managing that in the way to get a real impact on the SDGs. So the alignment through the funders, the impact investor, and how to be able to build a coalition together is still work in progress. So that's why I think we need more funds to be able to have a less conflict way of building this scalability. So that will be one challenge, and I think it's all over Europe. The good projects are still not that many. So you need to find the right, I think Lubomila is a great example with Plan A, and she's doing an amazing job, but there is not that many great entrepreneurs. Or maybe they don't feel to be ready to come up at the impact sphere. That will be one thing. And the impact investors, they also need to be less eager to be involved with the social entrepreneurs. I think we still need to find the right balance to make everyone being perfect and great at what they can do best. So that would be my first answer to your question, Mayur.
Thanks a lot, Virginie. I know this is, I think that question itself warrants a whole session, which might be longer than a 40-minute webinar to tackle, but thanks a lot for summarizing it beautifully. And from one impact investor to another, Christian, I'll move to you because you guys look at very innovative, scalable projects, actually. How has that journey been as an investor? And I think something which as an entrepreneur, people don't realize is that investors also raise money as much as entrepreneurs are looking to do. And how have you seen that change with SDGx over a period of the 2 to 3 years that you've been involved now?
So I think there's this concept around social entrepreneurship is actually quite challenging for impact investors, because very often the mindset of people that would invest in a fund, particularly when they're from more traditional areas, is this is not scalable. So we can't get an appropriate return on invest. And that's why our approach is a little bit different. And that's why we say, well, we invest in foundational technology, as modern words, probably deep tech for this, that can actually create a positive impact. And we help the companies to align their what you call theory of change, create a mission and a set of values for that to then go for the sustainable projects. And we match them with companies, projects where they can actually excel in and create a positive impact at scale. And that tends to work, but because there is still this social entrepreneurship attached to it, very often you have to break through this first through this first barrier, that you're not dismissed, because I truly believe that nobody creates a business, or most people don't create a business to actually create a negative impact. It's just that it happens to actually that you have positive and negative externalities that are created, and you need to take care of both. And that's then, of course, a problem then again of measurement, right? I mean, there's a reason we are in climate, for instance, because you can measure CO2. But if you are actually investing in something that has a secondary or third positive impact, or maybe even a negative impact, that's more indirect, and it becomes very difficult. And so I think that's mainly the reason why there's so much, or a positive increase, so to speak. It's quantifiable, right? And this is what the market really wants, and that's why we started in this. But it's a tough way to work, obviously. So.
But do you feel, Christian, it's something that is changing with because recently even the task force came up with the digital financing report on sustainable, basically combining the trifecta of sustainability, tech, and finance. Um, do you see a move? Because there are a lot of actions, there's a lot of talk, but sometimes that's an issue because talk is not followed by action. But where do you see this is going?
So, I mean, I think if there is, and the European Union is, I feel, going into a right direction with the Green Deal, obviously, but also other countries. I feel that right now there's such a buzz that a lot of companies need to do something, or a lot of investors feel that they need to do something. So there's always a risk that it becomes greenwashing to a certain extent, and I'm pretty sure this is happening all across the board. Also, if you look into what, let's say, Goldman or the big investment houses, they invest, right, and say, oh, we have this green tech fund, and then it's, I don't know, 500 million, and it's a couple of % of their total funds under management. So it's not really impactful in that sense. But I think policies will align towards what actually needs to be done, because we don't have a choice, and I think everybody knows we don't have a choice. It's just a question of a balance towards getting the right policies into place. I mean, the European Union taxonomy that came out and that they're working on, this is going into the right direction. If you look at the new Horizon 2020 that comes out in all the calls, there's always a layer of sustainability in this, and that's, I think, is extremely important. And so it's a question of whether there's a certain balance in moving towards sustainability. But I'm relatively.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Christian, for that. From the investor side, let me move to my fellow entrepreneur side. Guys, Lubomila, you've been raising funds for Plan A, Varan, so have you been. How have you seen the investor interest change? Because, of course, it's basically as startups and looking at the gap that is required to be funded for SDG fulfillment every year, we are like a drop in the ocean. But the drop really matters. So how have you guys as entrepreneurs seen a change in investor behavior, if any? Lubomila, you want to start?
It's been quite phenomenal to be part of this revolution, because, and I call it like that because honestly, for 3 years, the change I have seen has been fundamental, and I'm happy on one side with some of the changes, but then on the other side, I think still, as we spoke in the beginning, there's lack of knowledge on some of the investor side in terms of how to translate in something tangible, good, impactful business that maybe still is not with an ARR that is really relatable to any SaaS platform or something like that. What has been really interesting to observe, because we did a survey with all the members of the Green Tech Alliance, and they spoke openly about the challenges that they face, and funding is on top of the list. And this shows that as much as we, in this group of people that we're here, I'm assuming also amongst the listeners, the audience, and all the people that are going to join the festival for the 2 days, there's going to be a lot of people who feel like there's a lot of shift. But the moment when you go outside of the bubble of Berlin, Paris, Brussels, and Copenhagen, and anywhere else which we can think like Amsterdam, you all of a sudden see these entrepreneurs that are left with the old models. And from the 350 members, which are going to be 400 by the end of the week, actually, because we did a lot of interviews this week, there's many that don't come from these hubs. Of course, we have a lot of Berlin startups. Of course, we have a lot of ones from Brussels, from Paris, but the reality when you speak to someone from Nairobi, or you speak to someone that is based in Ljubljana or another place in all over the world, is that they have not seen the shift at all, which shows that we need to align also and democratize a bit the access to funding outside of these big hubs that all of us here somehow represent. So that's kind of the learning. I think this is something we need to realize, and also to start thinking of ways in which investors like Virginie and Christian can, you know, have a really clear path to access these pitch decks, access these phenomenal entrepreneurs that sometimes need to be trained to become more aligned and better entrepreneurs, but sometimes they're perfectly prepared. I was yesterday on a call with a startup that is based in the middle of Portugal. Honestly, phenomenal product, phenomenal pitch, startup is remote. Everyone was working from different cities, villages, and they are looking for 200K to kick off their platform that they would be able to release by the end of the year if they have the money. Total different dimensions than the ones that you listen in Berlin, where 6 million is a kickoff for an MVP.
That's really, really interesting, Lubomila, and completely agree with everything you said, actually. That's the strange part. Varan, curious to know from you.
Yeah,
you're sitting in the country of SDGs, right? So
yeah, you're right. I would definitely say that, like, I had like 8 to 9 years investment banking background. I've been working in the banks for a long time and tried out going out as an entrepreneur and thought of, I know a lot of friends in the banking sector. Let's do something quickly and get it out there and distribute our solutions out so we can actually get many, many more people on this journey. It turns out that whether you are 24 and just came out of the business schools or you have been working 8 to 9 years in the investment banking world, there is still a big, big change in terms of the generation change of how we understand impact and how we actually want to help into this movement. So we had to start from scratch and try to build up this again. When we're going out there, and whether it's a funding gap, like, you can actually get things out without getting funding if you think smart. We have 27 people working voluntarily on this project. This is not an NGO, it's a fintech startup. We have 63% women in the team, and 70% have never invested before in their life. So how we build up the startup is based on using ourselves as users and trying to use our competences to move it in that one direction. That's what we are trying to show off to the investors out there, saying we can be bootstrapped and we can actually get things out there without a funding to do that. Because utilizing our competences in the right, smart way, we can actually move and create this movement. And that's what we're trying to do here in Denmark, because not just because we are in the SDG country and we're talking a lot about the SDGs, and especially the corporates are doing that a lot, there's still a lack of funding into this impact business, because it's not like a unicorn business. It's not like, it's long-term investments. And the question, especially when you talk about impact investing and young generations, yeah, but the young people don't have the money. So the old business model, the red ocean, blue ocean, of course you're aware about that, but thinking into getting a market share and turning a little bit around and going into the blue ocean stuff and saying, let's see how we can create a business and actually create a movement and get the ambassadors of this movement actually to move direction and talk about how we do impact, how we do investing in tomorrow, like a new world of tomorrow. So we have had all these same issues that Lubomila also like mentioned here, but we maybe just thought that let's just do it anyway, because we can't sit and wait for the money, because it's not the money which is actually moving around. It's a competence in the people. So that's what we're doing here, and it's going quite well, like in terms of getting, on the other side of like moving the company in one direction.
Definitely, and that was very interesting. Thanks a lot for that. What we'll do is I'll move to Q&A because the questions are increasing, and we will try our best to answer as many questions. So guys, please keep asking questions. You can also upvote questions. So we will try to do it in a priority of the questions that most of you want to listen and answer to. The first one I'll take is I'll combine the first and the third topmost questions because they're on the same lines. And I think this question would be to Virginie and Christian. It's two questions, if I could simplify. One is that the main criteria is ROI for investor still. How is it that sustainable finance can achieve financial returns apart from being a tool for good? I think that's one part of that question. The second question, which has got the maximum votes, is what are the kind of non-financial KPIs that can be linked with these investments? The question which is from Gregor, he's saying that he knows that there are various metrics that are being used, but he's wondering if you have any concerns on what could be primarily looked at when evaluating these investments. So I think the first question is a larger question on how is it possible, and the second is then what metrics to use.
I might just specify what we do. I'm part of 2 investment committee for impact investment, and we have for every investment a matrix analysis based on the theory of change, and then we have like 5 KPIs that we are tracking all around the investment. So we will have exactly the same KPIs, financial and non-financially, and we will follow up them every semester. So that's something we do in the 2 investment funds I am in with. But maybe Christian.
I think you just muted yourself, but no problem. So it's actually quite similar to what you just described. The center is basically the theory of change. You can actually look this up. It's quite a standard model. So you look at inputs and outcomes and the impact that you want to have, and derive from that basically metrics. There are models on how metrics actually align to the SDGs. For instance, you can Google IRIS+. There's also the impact measurement project, I think. So there's a lot of things around that, and partially then obviously it also depends on the investment in itself, right? So you cannot use CO2 if you invest in a school. That's probably not useful. So obviously then depends a little bit on the investment itself.
Mayu, you're on mute.
A lot of these questions, I was just trying to say on mute, that a lot of these questions require very detailed discussion. So if you're not able to answer it in full, apologize for that, but we have limited time, so we'll try our best to answer it. Lubomila, I think the next question, I'll put it to you. It says that many companies are now adopting SDGs. Do you think this will help in financing? So, and maybe I think it's relevant to explain to people what's the connect.
So I think the fact that the popularity of SDGs is increasing is definitely contributing to people learning why they should align themselves more closely to the formulas of SDGs. So of course, and I think it's a fantastic question because it speaks about the fact that there's a big domino effect in society between the different stakeholders. When the government states something as an intention for the future, all of a sudden companies start thinking about, we need to prepare ourselves for probably a policy coming in place that is going to make us report more often, make us be more sustainable, reduce our emissions and so on. And companies are also trendsetters because they normally, especially the big ones, have a big population within themselves that can be defined in terms of a mindset. Definitely there's an influence from the company itself in how the people think within this company, and then finally a company influences its own consumers. I don't know if you followed what happened with Oatly a few days ago, and it's an interesting discussion. I think it's also one of those questions which requires another whole webinar where like, do we judge the fact that Oatly took money from Blackstone? People responded really harshly. They said, I'm never going to buy their products and so on, because you kind of align to a certain set of values. So the short answer to the question is I would say yes. And I think SDGs are a really complex system that still some people don't get. It's not simply climate action. It's not simply partnerships. It's not simply end hunger. There's subtasks that we need to accomplish, and there's also related to KPIs. So I think the more we know about SDGs, the more we can align to certain targets. And also we should constantly remind ourselves that we're really far from the targets that have been set out in Paris to make sure that we know that the sense of urgency is there. And it's related to all of us taking an action rather than expecting only the governments or only companies or only citizens to be at the forefront.
Definitely, and I think there's a related question, so I'll just address that as well. I think the question is around do you see the shift coming from large corporations, or it's better for investors to just, and consumers as well as customers, to bet on small, sustainable, buy local kind of companies? Where do you see the change coming at a scale?
From all of our customers, we have definitely have seen this variety of choices to take an action. We have the small companies, but we have like huge corporates. So there's definitely a different approach to the topic and different influences on why you choose to do the actions that you should. I think big corporates are going to be driving a lot the agenda because they're going to be the first hit by regulations. Many of you might know that carbon taxing is kicking in Germany in the beginning of next year, obviously for certain industries, but still a lot. France had a fantastic citizen assembly which defined a lot stricter rules for reporting on emissions. So again, another opportunity. And of course, this is not regulation that is at this point of time affecting significantly the micro businesses, like 1 to 10 people. And so, but it is affecting companies with over 250 employees. So in my opinion, and what we're seeing in our business, it definitely is coming from the larger companies, but the smaller ones should start thinking about this now, because at some point it's going to come to them as well.
No, definitely. And I think it's also a trickle-down effect, just to add to that question, because larger companies tend to have suppliers who are SMEs or smaller businesses, right? So as larger companies need these regulations, they are putting it in their tenders and contracts. So you need to fulfill those. And that's how it's kind of a trickle-down effect that happens. So I would completely agree with Lubomila, because actually the large corporations, when they start doing it, it has a great impact. This is a very interesting question, and which is what I want to do and keep one eye on the clock. The question is about which is the hardest community within the financial services sector. And Warren, I'm going to put this to you as an ex-investment banker. Which is the hardest community within the financial service sector to shift in terms of mindset towards more transparency, sustainability, and SDG focus?
Everyone in the financial sector will be my answer. Today, I was just commenting on Danske Bank, one of the biggest banks in Denmark, just launching a global sustainability fund, and did a nice visualization of how they are going to support a lot of, in sustainable matter. But in terms of transparency and look through, if you invest, and Christian was talking a little bit about it, that in the investment world, there's a way of earning money, and it's also to keep the IP on their own side. So instead of being 100% able to present all the companies in a fund and being only showing maybe the 75 out of 250 companies, you still keep something left. And that's sometimes the untransparency that actually the younger generation ask for. So the bank set up of how we earn money for a long time, and actually still are doing the red ocean stuff, like just call it a green fund, and when you look through it, you can't see all the stocks or the bonds which is in it is totally green. So there's a big change of mindset, and it's I would like to take the generation stuff there, because I look forward to the generation Alpha and the C's coming in to become actually the change makers into these financial worlds, to actually do it differently. So I see a big change there. And back to Lubomila's talk about the EU action plan and what's actually coming to the big corporates. It's actually you and me and everyone who can drive this change if we just speak up, and through digital channels and like our voice, we can actually move this into the world that we really want, if we always together actually is pushing those boundaries, actually questioning the financial world of how they actually can make sure that these things. Now, we haven't talked about the SDGs today, and I'm really happy that we didn't talk about that, because that measurement is like bullshit. Sorry to say, it's bullshit. It depends on how you actually define it. There's so many other KPIs that you have to look into, and there will be so many ratings in the future, and it's a combination of that. But in the end, it's about how we feel about it, because I might have a great story about one great company, and another friend of mine have another great story about the opposite part of my story. It's all about our values, how we actually understand how companies is making an impact, and that's what's drive actually the impact world in the future. That's just my view. So sorry for a long answer, but it was just my honest opinion of how I see
I
it.
think Varan, that was amazing because you actually answered the other question, which was about the bullshitness of ESG rating, if I could call it that. But to give a more balanced answer, I think what my personal opinion is, yes, ESG has huge flaws in it, but I think it's again one step towards something. And Christian, you had talked about EU taxonomy and other things coming in, which will work towards harmonizing a common definition for the sector. So to Maria, to answer your question in a complete way, if not ESG, what else? There are other criteria of sustainable finance like exclusion, which is again I feel even worse than ESG sometimes. So that's but that's how the sector is, and there is a lot of work happening with the EU taxonomy and other principles which are coming in, through which a lot of change would be coming in. So what I'm going to do is we're almost out of time now, so I'm going to launch a poll like I had said, where you can vote to all the attendees about how the session was, and of course tell us how much of financial jargon was there. So I'm launching the poll right now so that you could vote. And what I could do is maybe while we're talking about this, Virginie, maybe this question you could address because we got this earlier. How can impact bonds be applied to growing of slow tourism? It's a specific question about Brussels Digital Bike Network. So
how could the impact bonds being applied to what? Sorry, I didn't hear.
To the growing of slow tourism. I think it's basically how to spark the tourism industry, if I'm not wrong.
That's a very specific. I think the key ingredients for the impact bonds is that you have to be very clear on the different parties. So there is a need of the public authority to be keen to pre-finance it in a way, and to be open to private finance. And there must be a direct link between this authority and the sparing they're going to do. And if this is working, then you can build a social impact bond. Otherwise, it will be too complicated, and it's maybe better to think about new tools. So I don't know if I gave an answer, but that would be my answer to these questions.
Thanks, Virginie. And I also personally apologize if we did not answer it, but it's a very specific question. Anyways, I think thanks a lot for that question, guys. I'm really sorry we can't take all the questions, but what we'll try to do is we'll have the question, and if we can get the answers to you later, or we can always put it in our website and you can find answers to these questions. So let me take this opportunity to thank all of you. Thanks for joining us here, Virginie, Christian, Varan, and Lubomila. I think it was a short, interesting discussion. Like you guys said, almost all of these questions need a separate webinar, but what we're trying to do is maybe that's what happens in Step Up's second version, trying to get those questions which we can deep dive into. But thanks a lot for taking time out. What I'll do is...
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria.
Lovely having you guys.
Yeah.